All right, so we're going to move on with 11.2 today. This page is actually just a vocabulary page. The section itself is called Statistical Studies and Sampling Methods. Today we're going to focus on study methods. Tomorrow we're going to focus on the sampling methods. And this page here, we're just going to kind of list all the vocab because this one has a lot. And these terms, I think, are a little less maybe obvious than the previous section. So it's kind of nice to have it organized this way. So the first term is a crucial term. It's a term called bias. And this is a word you've probably heard before. We're talking about statistical bias here. So bias is when a study systematically produces results that misinterpret the population. All right, so when a study systematically produces results that misinterpret the population. Bias is prevalent in statistics studies. It is virtually impossible to create a study that doesn't have some amount of bias. Your goal, whenever you're doing any kind of study, is to try to minimize bias as much as possible. You want your study to be represent. Sorry, did I say interpret? My bad. Sorry, this should have been represent. I don't know what I'm doing. Misrepresent. Anyway, you want your study to represent the population as accurately as possible. Okay. And what we're really going to be talking about here is a lot of different ways you can reduce bias, but also things that cause bias and kind of looking at how do we make that not happen. Okay. So we'll see a bunch of examples here as we go forward. So the first thing we're going to look at today are the different types of studies. Now, these are the three most common types of studies. There's definitely other things you can do, but these are ways people get data or ways people get information. One of them that you've definitely taken part of is a sample survey. This is just a survey, like a questionnaire, whatever you want to call it, that every member of a sample completes and has the same set of questions. All right, so you see these often. We do these for school all the time. We send out a questionnaire, everybody responds, how do you feel about this certain thing? Or what would be your best option out of these things, and so on. And you give everybody the same questionnaire, you tabulate the results, and you see what the most popular opinions are. That's a really common type of survey. That's just called a sample survey. The name's pretty easy to remember because you're surveying a sample of people. Okay. We also have what's called an experiment. This is defined as applying a treatment. I'm going to put that in quotes. Applying a treatment to an experimental group and comparing it to a control group. So what this is, and this is really common in things like medical studies, drug studies, stuff like that, but also other things. This is where you divide your people, your population, or your sample, depending on what you're dealing with, into two groups, and one of them gets a thing, and one of them doesn't get a thing, and you compare what that thing does to whatever you're trying to test. Like, if you're trying to test a drug, let's say you get 100 people that all have a certain condition, you split them into two groups, and then you see this group gets the medicine, this group doesn't get anything, and you see, does it improve the condition? Does it stay the same? Does it get worse? That type of stuff. Okay, so those are pretty typical. There's a lot of things within here that can cause bias. We'll talk about those as we kind of move forward. And then the last type of study is what's called an observational study. And this is to measure members of a sample in such a way that they are not affected by the study. And again, the name here makes sense. An observational study, you're going to observe, or you're just going to watch a group of people, a group of things, whatever it is, and you're going to chart what happens. This is how a lot of like populations are measured. So let's say you've got a bunch of prairie dogs out in a field. You're trying to figure out how many prairie dogs live in this field. You can watch an area, and you can use that to make predictions and make calculations, and you chart each one of them and see what they're doing. But they don't know they're being watched. You don't like go up and shake their hand and say, "Hey, what's your name?" Take a census or anything like that. You're just watching and counting or observing what's happening. So this is a really common nature type of study, but it could be used for everything. I could walk into my class and just make an observation of how many people are wearing red shirts, and that would be an observational study. They don't know I just looked around and counted red shirts, but that would be the type of thing. So anything where you're just observing, but the people don't know they're being affected, and that's actually a really key piece to avoid bias. We're going to talk about that a little bit here and there. One of the problems with an experiment is a lot of times people know they're getting tested and they act differently. They do different things. Same thing here. People fill out a survey. They know where it's going to. They might try to guess its intentions, and they might fill it out a certain way that may not be necessarily true. So all things to take into account. All right, so we're going to save these other definitions for tomorrow. So go ahead and jump to example 1. Okay, so this is which of the 3 main types of study is being shown. So those 3 types of study, which we got sample survey, experiment, observational study. Let's see what these are. So it says a newspaper polls randomly selected residents in a town about which mayoral candidate they prefer. So however they do, they ask a bunch of people, hey, which guy do you want to vote for a girl who you want to vote for mayor? And everybody responds. Okay, this would definitely be a sample survey. You're sending out, even though it's just one question, you're sending out a questionnaire and getting responses back. So this would be a sample survey. Our second one here says a doctor conducts a clinical trial of new blood pressure medicine by prescribing it to half the patients in the study and measuring its effect it has on their blood pressure. So right here is a pretty key piece. They gave half the people this blood pressure medicine. They didn't give it to the other ones, and they looked at what it did. Definitely an experiment. So when it's an experiment, is going to have a control group and an experimental group. One group that's getting the treatment, one group that's not. And then our last one here was to say a grocery store wonders how many customers are bringing reusable bags to the store. They have an employee stand at the checkout and count the number of people who use reusable bags. So someone just stands down there, the bagger dude, and he just looks, and every time someone uses a reusable bag, he just clicks it or counts it or whatever. Those people don't know they're being counted. It's being observed. So this is an observational study. All right. So generally, these aren't too hard to identify, but these are your 3 main types of studies. All right, here's a couple more. If you want to take a second and read these and see if you can identify them all correctly. All right, so the first question was, how many hours per day do lions sleep? Definitely observational. You can't go up and ask a lion. It doesn't really make sense for an experiment either. So you're just watching them, counting how many hours they sleep. Definitely observational. How many students would like the cafeteria to serve breakfast? You'd use a survey for this. You'd ask, hey, as they're coming in, would you want us to serve breakfast? Do you want to serve breakfast? You either make a chart, whatever. Definitely a sample survey. This one, a group of plants is not growing well compared to the rest. What should you change to improve their growth? This is going to be an experiment. You're going to do something to them and then compare it to the rest of the plants, the control group. So again, not super complicated, but just a lot more terms. You're getting more terms every day. You want to kind of keep all these straight. Okay, sources of bias. So it says, in the following situation, are there differences between the groups potentially due to bias? In other words, you're looking for, is there anything wrong with the way they're taking their data? Is there something that might cause people to answer differently or to get the data, and it might not necessarily represent what's going on? That's what we're looking for when we're talking bias. So this says, a psychologist is conducting surveys to study the happiness levels of people who live in a neighborhood. She asked the same questions to 2 samples below chosen from the population of the neighborhood. So asking the same questions, that's important. You should be doing that. You shouldn't ask them different questions. That'd be a bad survey. She picked 2 samples. The key, though, is we look at who'd she sample. So she sampled 100 people on a sunny Saturday afternoon, and 65% of those people basically were indicated to be happy. She surveyed 100 people Monday morning, and 35% of those people were surveyed to be happy. I think this one's fairly obvious, but most people, especially these people hanging out at the park, swinging their kid around, these people are probably more likely to be happy. Most people, a sunny Saturday afternoon, the weather's good, it's the weekend. Generally speaking, people are going to respond that they're happier. Monday morning, a lot of people heading to work, less likely to be happy. This is a type of survey that has bias. Just go off on a little quick tangent. This is the kind of stuff you really got to be aware of as you're becoming a young adult and figuring stuff out is you got to understand when you ask people things, how you ask people things can really change the results. And you can do this for your benefit or to hinder you too, like depending on how you analyze things. And even just from like a media standpoint, a lot of standpoints is understanding where data comes from is really crucial in you making a decision on whether or not it's believable. Don't just believe it because you want to or do whatever, but make sure you know, all right, who did they survey? Where did they survey? What the questions look like? If you can get that information, you can make a much better decision with stuff like this. Because here, if you were just given this, the data is confusing. This is the same neighborhood, the same people. Why is it so different? Well, the time that they surveyed people changed things. Okay. Anyway, looking at a couple other ones here. This one says, same question, is there anything going on with bias here? So a school wants to know the average height of its students. The school randomly chooses some students and measures their height. Okay, that seems fine. Some students are under 5 feet tall and some students are over 6'5" tall. So some people are pretty short, some people are pretty tall. As far as reading this, there's nothing really going wrong here. Their goal is to figure out the average height of their students. Okay, so they're going to measure people. They randomly choose people, which is a good way to go about choosing things. And some people are pretty short and some people are pretty tall. So there's a big difference here, but that's fine. This big difference was not fine because there was a reason why they were so different. Here, this is just how people are. So in this case, I would say there's really no real bias going on here. People just vary in height quite a bit, and that is a normal thing to have happen. And this is where you have to be just kind of aware of what you're measuring and what you maybe expect to happen. Those types of things are actually pretty crucial in determining if there's bias going on. Okay? All right, let's look at this one too, and we'll wrap it up with this one. So it says, determine if the following studies have any bias or variability. If they contain bias, explain what is causing it. All right, so the student council surveys every 5th student walking down the hallway with the following question. Do you agree the question is, do you agree that the school would be more enjoyable if we had the opportunity to eat lunch outside? So they do some good stuff here. Surveying every 5th student, that's pretty random. They're not like picking and choosing their friends or anything like that. The issue here, though, is actually the question. If you ask someone, do you agree with this? More than likely, they're going to be led to say yes, just because of how that's presented. So this one has some bias. So they surveyed people fine. This part's okay. But I would call this, just to give it a term here, this is called a leading question. You may have heard this with like law terminology or like on a law TV show or something like that. But this is the kind of thing where you're leading someone to say what you want. And so again, you'd want to rephrase this question. This should just be like, how would you feel about having lunch outside? Or are you in favor or against? So the do you agree with part is leading people to say yes. So just got to be careful with stuff like that. This says, Stacy sat in a parking lot between a fast food restaurant and a local diner to determine which type of food most people in her town preferred. So she sat between a fast food and a diner and asked people, hey, what kind of food do you like? So her intention's good. She's trying to figure out what type of food is preferred in her town. Her issue is, though, where she's at. She's only going to get people that are going to a fast food and a local diner. She's missing out people who would cook at home. People went to the grocery store. She's only getting people that went to these restaurants. So this is biased in who she's choosing. So I would actually say this is biased towards anybody that's going to a restaurant. So we'll say towards restaurant goers. And again, the problem here is her data is not going to represent the population. It's a subset. It's the people who are going to these restaurants that she's surveying, not all of the people in her town. Okay, and then to wrap this up, research company calls 1 million residents of the United States, randomly selected from rural and urban areas, to collect their opinions on 2 new federal laws that are being proposed by Congress. So a lot of people being sampled, that's good. Randomly selected from different areas of each state. So each state's represented, each kind of areas are represented, and they're collecting opinions on some federal laws. This is pretty good. Now, I would say this has very low bias. Possible bias would be things like people who don't have phones, or maybe people who aren't listed, or people who aren't in the, or maybe they're some people who wouldn't be eligible to vote or something like that. So those are things you'd have to be aware of in something like this.